Let's see. Okay. Good afternoon. This is Senate Education. It is Thursday, February 11th, and we are going to continue on our path of looking at the creation of a school discipline advisory council. We heard from the executive director of Voices for Children, Carlin Finn, and I'm looking to see if Carlin is with us. Yes, I do see Carlin. Welcome, Ms. Finn. Thanks for joining us today. I understand that you have been following our work on this issue and reached out to me earlier this week and wanted to weigh in on and give us your thoughts. As you probably know, having followed us, the bill has changed quite a bit since its original entry onto the calendar. And we look forward to spending some time over the next 10, 15 minutes or so in hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you all
and
for...
if you would also, Ms. Finn, just give us an overview of your organization, that would be terrific.
Absolutely. So I'm Carlin Finn, and I'm actually a senior policy associate at Voices for Vermont's Children. I happily stepped into a different role and be able to focus more on policy, and gave the reins over to Michelle Fay, who is now the executive director. In any event, Voices for Vermont's Children is an independent children and youth advocacy organization. We focus on research and policy. So we do work, follow bills, work during the legislative session with committees and with legislators. We kind of run the gamut on issues, age and issues. Our primary focus is on public education, health, and wellness. We also focus on economic justice, and this is around kids, of course, and finally on the child welfare, child protective service system. And that's the primary way that we, the areas that we focus on. We're also the state Kids Count organization. There's a Kids Count organization in every state and the District of Columbia, funded by the Annie Casey Foundation, and that supports a real in-depth focus on data, on child well-being, and we produce reports and everything from county level, looking at county level indicators for kids and families, and up to reports like the report that I sent, and I sent it late, my apologies. In the testimony, there's one testimony document that has live links to that report and others. Does that cover it?
That's terrific.
Okay, great.
Yep,
oh, and let me just say, I also, we are in partnership with the Public Assets Institute on public education equity work, and I'm the co-coordinator of that project, and our focus is on kids and families, students, education policy, and public assets focus is on school funding, finance, and weighting issues, all of that. So we have, that's how I come here to all of you, is I'm primarily focused on education policy. In 2016, Voices for Vermont's Children released its report, Education Matters, The Impacts of Systemic Inequity in Vermont. As the title suggests, the report examines inequities in our education systems, whether it is persistent gaps in reading and math proficiency, lower four-year graduation rates and higher dropout rates, unequal access to after-school programs, or disparities in disciplinary practices. The data really do show how systematically disadvantaged and harmed by these inequities our children, our students are. BIPOC students, low income, disabled, immigrant, English language learners, and LGBTQIA, BTQIA. These data tell me, I think they really do reflect, that these and other disparities are linked and are not isolated problems that can be eliminated one by one. We really look at it system-wide, systemically, what the challenges are for our students and for our education system. My question for the committee is this. Do we need another advisory group or task force to tell us what we already know, rather than assembling another committee that will take time and resources? Can the legislature instead, and I really don't know the answer to that, I'm asking, can the legislature instead direct the Agency of Education to collect discipline and exclusion data and require timely reporting? Just as a basis, can we start there? And this, to me, approach would allow a task force to spend their time meaningfully focused on identifying best practices that address discipline policy and other related inequities, like truancy, academic supports, access to academic supports, etc. So that's a question, but also recognizing that if the committee decides to move forward with creating a task force on school discipline reform, I have some suggestions for the findings section and for the makeup of the task force and its focus.
Ms. Finn, just to make sure,
yes.
You have seen our most recent draft, correct? You were working from?
Draft 2.1?
Perfect. I just want to make sure. Great. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. Yes, because I hope the lines match that I'm going to focus on. Some of these suggestions are, are substantial. Others are really just to add more information into the document. And I would start on page 1, line 17, and that is exclusionary discipline is used mostly in middle and high schools. And what we found in our research is that the most recent AOE report shows the majority of incidents are coming from this age range, middle and high school, but it also reports almost 2,000 exclusionary or discipline of grades K through 12, 27% of the total. And of these, that's 462 were in grade K through 1 alone. And so I don't know how important the findings are to the bill, but to me, I read thoroughly the findings because I think it does help us get a better sense of the purpose and goals. And I would suggest adding in that piece about the K through 5 grades, because it's a significant number of students, of young children. So on to page 2, line 18. This is also, it may seem picky, but I think that it would be, I'm recommending specific data be included here that break down by student group to highlight the disparities in exclusionary discipline. We have the data. I mean, it's old data, but we have the data that is very clearly shows, how many and what rate, like it's per thousand, so I can't say percent, what rate of children in the different categories, like children with IEPs or 504 plans or children, students of color, it really shows the disparities, and it's Vermont data. And I would recommend just kind of like including that if you can. And I shared a report, and there's an actual chart where there you can see the data laid out very specifically by student group in the AOE's 2017 Exclusionary Discipline Response Report. Okay, so on page 3, line 3, this is the use of discipline strategies such as exclusionary. This line, I'm not sure this is the place for it, but I have read and listened to testimony from most of the folks, most of your witnesses, and the Disability Law Project raised a concern about data collection. And so I'm not sure if it goes here or if it would go on page 8, where we're really deep into the around what the task force is collecting data. But they said, in addition to collecting data on the number of days students serve in out-of-school suspensions, districts must be required to collect and report on the number of instances where students experience shortened school days, e.g. are not formally suspended but sent home for disability-related behavior. That really struck me as important data information that we should be gathering. Okay, moving on to page 4, line 5, the creation of the task force. So this is a major proposal. I'm suggesting, and this is through, this is coming from a number of folks and programs that work around truancy, that truancy really should be added, absenteeism and truancy really should be added to this task force work. Because youth and families are currently being disciplined for truant behavior. And that school to prison pipeline, you can see a direct, children and families are, very closely connected to the court system or to DCF through the truancy laws that we have in the process that we have. And it's always seems to be left out of when we talk about exclusionary, when we talk about discipline and exclusion practice. And I think it should be in there. And I would strongly recommend, hearing from the folks like the Lamoille Restorative Center is doing incredible truancy work in schools, in their schools in their purview. And there's you may know of this, oh my gosh, it's the BARC, I think it's called, that is, let's see, it's Sarah Ballou, I'm sorry, Balanced and Restorative Justice Coordinator down in the Brattleboro area. And there are pockets, there are programs around the state. And they feel, and I was quoting actually Sarah in terms of her, she really, sees this as do other folks working in truancy and absenteeism. This is a critical piece that should be addressed and could be in this task force. Okay, so I'm on to page 4, still on page 4, line 13. And this is about the membership of the task force. And I'm recommending that the method for appointments to the task force be different than the way it's laid out. And that is because we have, by leaving it with the agency secretary to make all the appointments, we're really kind of leaving out who I think we want involved in not only choosing, but like helping to reach out to the folks that we want on this, that should be on this task force. And
But may I just interrupt for one moment?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm just trying to clarify 2 points. So you initially, and correct me if I'm wrong, you don't want a task force, you want the agency to do it. But here we're saying we want the agency involved in doing it, but you don't want them choosing the people. I'm just trying to understand exactly kind of.
Sure. So my first part of my introduction was about the, if, if there is a task force, it could be doing something different than collecting data around discipline. And
so are you arguing that the data shouldn't be collected?
No, I'm
Okay.
arguing, I was arguing that can the legislature just say to the agency, collect this, collect it.
Right.
But recognizing how far along you all are with this task force, I'm just accepting that we're probably going to be going, this is probably going to come into existence. So now this is how I'm kind of sorting through. These are the recommendations I have if it goes forward as a task force that includes data collection.
Yeah. Okay, Senator Hooker.
Thank you. But Ms. Finn, this could, in your estimation, a task force could be formed, but to have a different focus. I heard you talk about, we have the data. We have data, and using that data to come up with either best practices or looking at perhaps areas where there is a problem and how it can be addressed. I mean,
Yes.
Am I getting that from you? Thank you.
Yes. Yes, and I hope it becomes a little clearer when we go down the rest of this document. And kind of back to Senator Campion, really the question about, so if there will be a task force, I'm suggesting that a different process than the Agency of Education Secretary being the person who makes the appointments. And I'm basing that in part on the experience of being a part of the Act One coalition, that the coalition that helped pass, which is now Act One, that Amanda Garces is the chair of, and their process was they took on appointments of over half of the working group, and I think that process resulted in a very diverse and representative group, which was the intention, which is part of the intention of that of the law, but also of the legislature in setting that working group up. And so, I don't know exactly what the process is. I mean, I know what it was for Act One, for that working group, but I do know that there are groups out there, alliances and organizations who could help, appoint particular group, individuals like parents who whose parents of students who've experienced, parents of students with disabilities or who have an IEP, or students who have an IEP. And, you know, we can go down the list, even the Education Justice Coalition.
Right. Ms. Finn, yeah, I think we have a good sense of how to do it. I just worry a little bit. We do have a tight day with witnesses coming in at 2.
Okay.
So
I'm almost done.
Terrific. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, sorry. So page 4, starting with line 13, I strongly recommend additional members or being very specific about members, and that would be restorative practice practitioners and a member from the Community Justice Center, our centers who focus on absenteeism and truancy, especially if you think this willing to take the truancy piece on. And finally, independent researchers. The director of research at Voices would probably kill me that I put this in here, but I think we have a lot of folks who have access to information and data that would be very useful and supportive of this process. I'll jump, you know, page 6, line 1 is a discussion about school resource officers. And it just reminded me of S63, which is basically eliminating, school resource officers. And there's it's this connection between, if there's going to be, there should be some conversation about the connection between S63 and the work of this council. And finally, in the testimony,
I just have to ask a quick. So,
yeah,
how that seems to address? I'm not sure how more specific it could get with regard to law enforcement and contact with students, etc. I'm not exactly sure how to make it any more clear.
Well, what I'm thinking, or why I brought this up, is that it would be hard to implement a more universal set of policies if we are, kind of ignoring the issue of SROs and dealing with SROs. So that it seems like there is a connection here. With one policy, I'm not sure the legislature is going to take it up or not.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make that connection.
Okay, thank you.
And then the final is we recommend, as suggested in written testimony that I provided from Ellen Cook, who's a school counselor, and there's other, and Lindsay Hallman provided written testimony. They couldn't be here today, and that, restorative justice and practice lead the research into best practices, with a focus both on discipline and truancy. And I won't read her quote. I pulled it right out of her testimony. But really, we know that there's some really good work going on, and I think could be not the only focus, but a center of this research into best practices in Vermont.
Great. Committee questions? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Finn. We appreciate you coming in. Stay in touch as we make our way through. We're still working on things, and you have submitted written testimony.
I have.
Okay, terrific. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's shift to literacy, and something that has, been another regular topic in this committee. I see Ms. Myers has joined us. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, committee, you may recall that about a week ago now, as we were starting to make our way through how to best help Vermont students and improve our literacy rates, Ms. Myers and Senator Perchlik and Libby, is it pronounced Broadsteel?
Bonesteel.
Bonesteel, thank you, Bonesteel. Met and came up with some ideas, came up with a few things that Ms. Myers has agreed to come in and talk to us about today. So as we know, we were getting things sort of on the table. We're hearing from different people. Hopefully we'll end up with something that will advance this topic and advance this issue. So we do really appreciate, Ms. Myers, you taking the lead on this.
Great. Thanks, Senator Campion, for having me. I think Libby will be popping in somewhat soon, but I'm happy to get started anyways. I just want to, in my position, Vermont Superintendents Association, Associate Executive Director, just let you know that this thinking is informed by some of our members' thoughts and opinions on this subject, but not all. So they may come in on their own accord as well, or we might invite them in later on other versions of this bill to testify based on their own lived experience. So just wanted to start off there. The conversation that Senator Perchlik, Libby, and I had this week, I would say started with the conception that both the House is working on something and the Senate is working on something, and kind of where do those two things converge, those conversations converge, and kind of putting it into buckets. And so we came up with 4 buckets. One was vision. We are not sure if this needs to be legislated, but I have heard from a number of superintendents that a vision for literacy statewide is important for setting goals and expectations. So what might this include? Well, first, we could consider what are the objectives for the state around literacy? What are the core principles of early literacy instructional practices? It is worth noting that the Agency of Education does have an early literacy blueprint. I'm not sure how it is used or how it was received when it was first introduced, but it might be something worth looking into as a starting point. And then some of our members also said that a clear articulation of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 in regards to literacy would be helpful. Again, I don't know what exists in this regard so far, and if it could be a launching point for that goal. But I also see that as a way that the House bill, which focuses on Act 173 support, kind of intersects with your bill as well. The second piece, as we've all been talking about, and the really common thread between the current House and Senate approach, is the data piece. We recommend that any data collection and reporting be linked strongly to a growth model and targeted support. Data collection, reporting, and subsequently using the data to inform practice takes time and resources. We feel this should be accounted for in any move towards data collection. There have been some really good conversations in House Ed as well with my colleague Jay Nichols from VPA, Marge Lipson from UVM, all talking about data. I don't want to endorse or speak to anything related to assessments and what assessments might possibly be used, because that is certainly not my expertise. But here are some components that we discussed being included in any data efforts. First, report data in the younger grades. If you can include pre-K in this, it could be tremendously valuable given how language gaps are present prior to entering school.
Ms. Myers, I just want to interrupt for one moment. We do,
yeah, of course.
Senators, I do have an email from Ms. Myers that outlines all of this, and I will send it to Jeannie right now to make sure she sends it to all of you. Thank you.
Yes, I apologize for not submitting it formally ahead of time. The second would be benchmark assessments do not need to be specifically chosen, but what it measures should be. We discussed pretty at length, I would say. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Senator Perchlik, if I have it wrong. We discussed whether this is getting people to weigh in on data points, or like what does what do the collection points look like, but before any legislation is passed, and specifically include something in legislation, or if the process for which the determination of what we're measuring occurs after the fact, or that it's outlined in the bill how that's going to be decided. As discussed in the committee, this might also look like defining some proficiencies for literacies in early grades and then matching up whatever data collection we use to those determined proficiencies. Next, collected data should be used to drive targeted professional development. I think that was in our original testimony. We recommend creating a plan for the AOE to report data. This could be a report delivered to the General Assembly on a defined timeline. The report should include a professional learning and support section based on the data. So going a step beyond just examining the problem, but how the data will then tell us how we move forward, both in practice, procedure, and policy. A longer term goal would be to identify schools that are showing growth in particular areas and sharing their strategies. And again, whether this all needs to go into board policy is something that we left open in our discussion. The SBA is the best to hear more about this, and I think you are hearing from Sue Siglowski later, and I've read her testimony and it speaks to that. Do you want me to pause here on the data? It's kind of a big one, so.
That'd be great. The data collection stuff looks really great, really, really important. Questions or comments? Senator Hooker, did you have a question?
Is any of this data being collected now? And if so, where is it housed and what's being done with it at this point?
Yeah, so the SBAC scores, which is probably what drove a lot of this conversation in the first place, are collected at third grade and housed at the AOE. In terms of measurements prior to that, I don't believe much is collected. Libby can speak to that, but maybe she could also speak to what she collects at the local level, just to give you a sense of what's collected between pre-K and third grade.
Yeah, we don't report out on that data to the state in any way, our K-2 data. And what, as a local assessment plan that we have, and I know that other districts have as well, is that I have in my fingertips, so at the district level, I can access data around text level using FMP text levels, Fountas and Pinnell text levels. I can get to data around letter ID. I can get to data around spelling inventory that we give that breaks down into different syllable types and that kind of thing. Sight word recognition, phonological awareness, you know, all of the biggies I can get my fingers on that our K-2 schools do, and most K-2 schools do some sort of assessment on those foundational skills.
And then it's interpreted or it's used to inform what you do for professional development, for individual kids' access to supports. Is that?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest, Senator Hooker, and I think this is a big area of growth for teachers and leadership teams at the school level, is to be able to look at that data both at a school level and at an individual classroom level and say, what do I do next? You know, and not sit on it, you know, because you want the data right in your fingertips and then act on it the next day in your small group instruction. And I think that's a significant area of growth for our K-2 teachers, pre-K through 2 teachers. We need to grow there, right? So, and know what the progression of skills is between those skills, the smaller strategies inside of the skill.
Okay.
The Agency of Education has a data literacy initiative about to kick off, I believe. It might be worth hearing from them kind of where they see that going, in what direction.
And that's really what we're talking about, helping those early grade teachers to understand data and how to work with it.
Exactly. What I want my teachers to see is, this is what this kid just did.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, and for 3 days, I'm going to intensively work on this with this kid or this group of kids who are showing the same skill need, and then see where they are after that, right? And move on. We're not there yet.
And I just ask you both, you know, and this is really a question the agency will also be talking to us about this, but is the agency equipped, in your opinion, to handle these kinds of things? I mean, one of the things we haven't asked Secretary French for is sort of an org chart, if you will. You know, it's sort of, you know, how many people does he have versus how many people does he need to be working on some of these things?
That is a loaded question. I'm gonna point that to Chelsea to answer, because she's much more politically savvy at answering those kind of questions.
I'm going to direct the question to Secretary French. I don't feel equipped to comment on.
No, that's fair. Absolutely. I completely, I'm just, you know, one of the things is, you know, I've continuously continue to hear over the, you know, the decade or more that I've been in the State House, is the Agency of Education has just become smaller and tighter and smaller and tighter. And I, rather than, you know, jump into the urban legend thing, I think we just need some more data on what the agency is looking like and how can we help it. And I know I'm not the only one. I know the chair of APROPS is also interested in literacy. And
I can tell you, Senator Campion, that when I'm looking for guidance or professional learning opportunities, I don't even think to go to the Agency of Education.
Okay, that's helpful.
I can tell you that personally.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. I appreciate that, Kendor. I am wondering though, if you would just say one word about where you do go. I mean, there must be organizations that are they sort of like every profession has its group of folks. It's, or, you know, so it's one of those kinds of associations that you go to.
Yeah, we network a lot, of course,
Yeah.
with other state leaders, because we have some really smart people in this state.
Yeah.
And the other place that I know is the ESA, the Educational Support Agencies, is been knocked out in this state. CVED is the last one, Champlain Valley Educator Development Center. It's mainly out of Champlain or Chittenden County. However, we're a member of that. I'm on the board for it. And so if there's a need for professional development, I can go to Lauren. Now, the history of that, though, very quickly, is that the Agency of Education used to provide significant grant money to places like CVED and what used to be LAPTA. And then there was also one in the Northeast Kingdom, but I'm blanking on what the name of it was. And these were agencies that really worked regionally with school districts and to name the professional learning that needed to happen regionally. When that grant went away, when the Agency of Education decided not to give them that grant anymore, they were on their own. And LAPTA is gone. That was what Central Vermont used. The Northeast Kingdom one is gone. CVED is the last one standing, primarily because they had the most members, being in the most populous part of our state. But right now they're waffling because of where we find ourselves right now.
Yeah, thank you. Senator Hooker?
You had, I think it was you who had talked about, you know, well, obviously we're not doing the testing K through 3, right? Or
standardized testing, like statewide standardized?
We're doing it at grade 3. Is that where it starts?
That's where SBAC starts,
okay.
Yeah.
So what's keeping us from doing it earlier? I mean, obviously there must be testing platforms that are available. What is keeping us? Is it expense? Is it just too much work? What's the problem?
I would argue that it may not be developmentally appropriate
Okay.
for our kindergarten to second graders. The SBAC assessment in particular, to look at that one, that's a pretty complex text. Or, you know, it's on a computer. It's a lot of writing, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of time in a seat. And standardized testing is not necessarily something we want our 4 through 7-year-olds to do.
Okay, so we don't want the standardized testing, but we do want to be able to assess these kids.
Yep.
And are we doing any of that?
It's through our local assessment plans, which we are all required to have.
And do they have access, teachers have access to the results of these tests and
Yeah.
can work on it? And that's kind of the track that we're looking at increasing, is that, you know, to make sure that everybody has access to the results and can respond accordingly?
Yeah, and know how to respond accordingly and quickly.
Okay.
Would one of you mind just emailing us, just for our own education, what one of these standardized tests look like? I mean, just like a few questions, you know, just so as we are going through, we just have some context for what 3rd graders are taking.
From the SBAC?
Just a few sample kinds of questions. Just senators, your scores won't be shared. But no, really, I think because it's sometimes just helpful, I think, just to know. Senator Perchler?
Yeah, thank you. On this data point, the way I understand it is that what the Agency of Education was suggesting was we use these Lexile scores to try to get something that's statewide and comparable. But what I learned from Libby and Chelsea is that that's not a good thing either. And what I heard is that basically schools would just do what they're already doing, but then have to translate it into a Lexile score or something to comply. And it's really not moving us forward in improving the literacy that we want. We really need to support the teachers to do the literacy work. And that's the key thing. And that there are ways to make these assessments, but they need the support to do it. At least that's what I came out of the conversation learning.
Yeah, and I think that's what the email and also everything that I've been reading about and learning about, since the two of you were in, it's really giving the supports to the teachers, whether it's through the agency. I think you both made a great point about it can't just be a one-off conference, not, in general, people, any of us, any profession, you need more than that. And yeah, and just to clarify, my interest in the test isn't to evaluate the test. I'm just curious to know what it is really. What is the kind of thing that we're asking students to take? But I can't agree more with Senator Perchlik that this is about educating teachers, giving them more education, giving them the supports, giving them the time to really do what they need to do. Ms. Myers?
Yeah, I saw Jay entered the room. Per his conversation with the House yesterday, I believe he's collecting information on the benchmark assessments being used around the state. So that might be information you all would like to hear about too later when he has that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, go ahead and continue. I think you're...
Great. So that was a really good segue. The teacher pipeline was our next bucket. I should note our outline doesn't include what's already included in your bill, but I don't think we are opposed in any way to looking at kind of pre-service requirements and what that looks like from a higher ed perspective. We just didn't talk about that at the meeting. So the question is, how can we get more literacy professionals in those areas that need it? And then, so the idea, I think in my original testimony, I just talked about kind of putting literacy coaches into schools that need it. But as I thought about it more after visiting you the first time, it really needs to come from a place where you're encouraging leadership from within, so that you're not experiencing the turnover rate that we're seeing. I think this is very closely related to the COVID-19 question or conversation you all had with all of our associations the other day. It came down to the teacher shortage and what are we going to do to support our state in the teacher shortage. So one idea is to support a loan forgiveness program for educators interested in earning a degree that would better equip them to be literacy specialists. Loan forgiveness is based on a certain number of years of service in that region, and those pursuing the program could also use their allotted PD allowance to compensate for the program. So we could pull from different buckets of funding. In order to support that work, we must create a framework for which these individuals then can support the whole school. So it's not just improving their own practice, but being leaders in their community. For example, creating regional literacy coaching networks with new literacy specialists and existing literacy specialists to get coaching support from the AOE and to share ideas. If this type of model worked, it could be replicated to support teacher shortages in other areas as well. For example, school counselors are in shortage in a lot of areas in the state, and we're going to need those coming into the recovery period. So I'll pause there. That was the next bucket.
Any questions? Everyone knows, I raised loan forgiveness with appropriations, and I have another meeting with appropriations and the pro tem on Monday as it relates to loan forgiveness in general for teachers and the need. We continue to hear that not only literacy, but I'm sure you both know, and I think both of you help make us aware of it, that sometimes, candidates or openings are just getting so few applicants. And I think it was Ms. Bonesteel last time who said, you could be searching for somebody, but we need to increase that applicant pool, and hopefully some kind of loan forgiveness will help with that. Yes, Senator Hooker.
There is a loan forgiveness bill being crafted, waiting
Right.
for a fiscal note on that. So
That's your bill?
it is, and
Yep.
it includes teachers and childcare providers and also nurses. It's a kind of expansive, but it's certainly something that we could look at and use as a vehicle.
Sure. And what I'm just trying to continue to push for in my conversations with the probes is just getting a sense of what kind of dollars are possible, just so we don't have some, as I quote with a lot of things, some kind of academic exercise where in the end, a probe is just going to say, sorry, folks, I just want to get some kind of understanding what might be possible, and hopefully that will come sooner rather than later. So, okay, please feel free to continue.
All right, the final bucket was just, we had a conversation about the grant program that's over in the House. The House has proposed a grant program to support districts in need of additional professional development dollars in implementation of Act 173 through the lens of literacy. Sorry, there's a typo there. We had a discussion about the utility of this program. I will note that there have since been revisions to that bill that kind of alleviated some of the first issues, which were that it was a very cumbersome process and you would deter a lot of people from pursuing it. And that the grant does still allow for new hires. I will say it is difficult to use one-time money to hire personnel, as the position is either not sustainable or contingent upon the local budgeting process in future years. And when schools get used to a certain resource and then it's taken away because of short-term money, it's a very hard transition, as you all know. We had a conversation that this program would likely be most useful if it uses the one-time money to drive systems leadership capacity, since it is one-time money. Most notably, this could look like an instructional leadership or coaching program for principals and other teacher leaders. The aim is to support leaders in being able to better support teachers. Sustainability of this money depends more on a train the trainer type of model, since it is one-time money. And the principal is the second most influential to a teacher in improving academic outcomes, and they are critical in helping to coach and give feedback to teachers in their building. So.
Very helpful.
I think that's it for me.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate your efforts. Committee of questions. Piece of cake, right? I mean, it's a complicated, but it's such an important issue. And so we are going to continue to take testimony, and then I think it'll be on any senators who want to help, but it'll be on me and Mr. Desmarais to draft something to bring back to the committee after we've taken all this in, and see if we can get somewhere. I'm glad that the House is also working on this, and I know that Kate Webb has mentioned that to me. So it feels good in terms of all hands on deck, good partnerships, and really appreciate the two of you taking the time with Senator Perchlik.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'll stick around for Jay and Sue's testimony.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you as well, Ms. Bonesteel, although I suspect you might have other things, but that's completely up to you.
I always like listening to Jay Nichols and Sue.
Oh, good. All right, with that, let's, Ms. Saglowski, are you here? Yes, there you are.
I'm here. I just turned on my camera.
Terrific. It's good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
And welcome back to Senate Ed. You know, we are, you've seen what your two colleagues have put forward with regard to literacy. And I know you also have thoughts coming from the School Board Association, and look forward to hearing those.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to first talk a little bit about roles and responsibilities in Vermont school systems, because we believe that this proposal in the bill should be viewed through the lens of appropriate roles and responsibilities of Vermont school boards and superintendents. So in 2016, the Vermont Agency of Education issued guidance on roles and responsibilities in Vermont school systems. And this was really to ensure that systems are organized to support goals of quality and equity in student learning, and that district resources are used in the most effective way to support those goals. And you can find, I've included a link in my written testimony to the Agency of Education document that lays this information out. So the guidance correctly notes that school boards' roles as elected officials is really governance. And the guidance recommends that school boards fill this role by doing several different things, including engaging the community to establish the mission and vision for the district, then using that mission to guide decision-making, setting performance goals for the district, establishing local policies aligned across the supervisory union or supervisory district that are consistent with the minimum standards established by the State Board of Education, employing and supervising the superintendent, who is the sole direct employee of the board, holding the superintendent accountable for developing a strategy and education work plan to achieve district or SU goals, and negotiating contracts with employees. So those are the responsibilities of the school board. The guidance then goes on to provide that the superintendent's role as the CEO of a school district is operations, as opposed to school boards, which was governance. And that guidance recommends that superintendents fill the role by doing a number of things, which I've set out in my written testimony. And I won't go through all of them, but the first one is provide operational oversight of the school district. We encourage you to take a look at the AOE's guidance that I've just been talking about on roles and responsibilities in Vermont school systems, because it also covers the role of principals, who are the instructional leaders, and teachers, whose responsibilities lie in developing and delivering instruction. This guidance from the AOE is instructed when you're looking at the committee bill, DR 21-0807. In that bill, there's a proposal for a required school board policy that focuses exclusively on literacy, requires implementation of a specific type of assessment system for all students in particular grades, and requires school boards to develop processes for identifying and addressing the needs of struggling readers. This bill takes school boards out of their governance role and moving them more toward an operational role, which could be problematic. In order to stay within their roles and responsibilities, it's more appropriate for boards to set goals that are tailored specifically for their districts for improving student literacy outcomes, and then provide the necessary resources in their budgets to support reaching those goals. You were just talking with Chelsea a little bit earlier about the type of approaches that you might use to support reaching those goals. And I would note that this is already happening in many districts throughout the state. But I would also say that if the committee determines that it's going to move forward with the proposals in the bill and require some type of school board policy, VSBA will of course support school boards by developing a model policy that would comply with the law. Just wanted to make you really aware of those lines of roles and responsibilities. Moving on to the requirement in the bill that requires the supervisory union board to conduct an annual evaluation of superintendent job performance, including whether goals for improving student literacy outcomes have been met. Vermont law, which is, it's in 16 VSA section 241, charges supervisory union boards with hiring and evaluating the superintendent. And an annual performance review is a critical component of the work of the board and the superintendent. Ideally, that review is going to be the outgrowth and extension of a productive working relationship that's based upon adhering to those roles and responsibilities that I just spoke about and implementing the vision, mission, goals, and policies of the school system. The annual performance review should ensure the board performs its evaluation role effectively and in a way that can be directly linked to district goals. Evaluation processes should be tailored to each system's unique circumstances. School boards already conduct annual evaluations of superintendents. This draft bill's requirements for the content of those evaluations, we believe, is overly prescriptive and assumes that all superintendent evaluations should be conducted in a cookie cutter fashion rather than tailored to the needs of each district. So we do not think that the evaluation section of the bill is necessary. And I'll just conclude by saying that I appreciate the opportunity to testify on the important topic of literacy instruction and outcomes in the context of roles and responsibilities in Vermont's school systems. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I think, it's interesting. It's been somewhat consistent, I think, that from testimony from a range of folks that people don't believe that that evaluation part of the superintendent's roles and responsibilities should include this kind of connection to literacy, that really keep it within the local decision-making around how one evaluates a superintendent. I think that's my inarticulate way of saying that. I think we've heard that kind of testimony quite a bit, and I appreciate hearing it from you. Senator Hooker, did you want to say something?
Oh, I think it just shows that this is one part of the evaluation, and in the bill, it seems as if everything is dependent on literacy improvement. So, that's the type of thing that we need to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Zagleski, is there anything else that you want to, what you've given us is very helpful around roles and responsibilities. Is there anything else you want to mention around literacy, or as we continue to sort of rethink this early draft?
Not at this time, thank you.
Okay, great. You know where to find us.
Yes.
Mr. Nichols.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So for the record, Jay Nichols, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. It kind of worries me when Libby Bonesteel says she wants to stick around and listen to my testimony. So hopefully I do all right here. So thank you for the opportunity to testify on this issue. Before I jump into the specifics of the draft bill, I want to make a quick related statement.
Sure.
I spent most of my career advocating for strong early childhood education. This is primarily because of the social emotional strategies schools can provide to help students with executive functioning and self-regulation issues. Additionally, I've been a proponent of early education because it has demonstrated significant and measurable statistical gains in students' school readiness assessments and has also been correlated with end of third grade reading achievement progress. It's my belief that one of the best ways to improve reading outcomes for students is to provide all 4-year-olds in Vermont an early kindergarten and full day program. That is from a position statement of the VPA. Many countries and some states already do this. If our goal is to really improve reading achievement of students, this is one statewide systemic approach we can take. Now, specifically to the bill at hand, I'm a strong proponent of the changes in instructional practice that I believe are much more likely to occur with successful implementation of the Act 173 law. This law, to me, is not a special education law as much as it is an every student educational law. So let me comment on each part of the bill briefly, just so I have that out there. I agree with the findings section of the bill. I think we need to improve the literacy skills of our students. This instruction needs to formally begin with early kindergarten, and when I say that, I'm talking about 4-year-olds, and continue through third grade, with every student having access to the time and support they need to be independent, high-functioning readers. In essence, the ability to be an independent functioning reader at the end of third grade must be the constant. The amount of time a student needs, the different instructional approaches a student might need, The resources and interventions the student might need, those all must become the variables. If we're really serious about reading instruction, the constant has to be having students be independent, functioning readers by the end of third grade. In addition, we traditionally say that in the early grades, students are learning to read. After third grade, they're reading to learn. Students that are significantly below grade level at the end of third grade often spend the rest of their academic careers trying to catch up, and the gap in reading ability between them and their peers generally widens. Students significantly below grade level at the end of third grade are 90% more likely to drop out of school without a high school diploma than students who are on grade level at the end of third grade. We do need to remember that although the findings in the bill mention learning loss to the pandemic, our students are likely in a much better place comparatively to other states. This is because, on average, our students have received much more in-person instruction than schools in other states, because our state has done a very good job of mitigating the impact of the COVID-19 virus as compared to other states. We should all be thankful for that. I was recently talking to my counterpart in another state who told me most of their schools have had no in-person instruction since last March. I do think it is time for every school board to have a specific policy on literacy if they don't already have one. That policy needs to focus on identifying struggling students and requiring that necessary resources are used by the system to provide whatever is needed to ensure all students are where they need to be in reading skills by the end of third grade. Working with the Vermont School Boards Association and the Agency of Education, a policy can be developed that meets the needs that you've outlined in the bill. In terms of implementing benchmarks, I was asked by Health Ed yesterday to put a survey out to the elementary principals. I can link that to you, Senator Campion, to share with your committee afterwards. And it's a document where you can go in. It's a real live document, so you can see it as people update it. I've just asked them to share what assessments they're using in K through 3 and any thoughts that they have. So it's wide open for comments. I have no problem with reporting to AOE via Lexile scores or any other agreed upon method that is consistent across the state. I would just want to know what the purpose is and what would be the most effective. And I do not have an answer as to what would be the best data point in terms of that. I think we need to ensure a process for identifying struggling readers early and make it clear that we're going to provide whatever interventions for students are necessary, regardless of the reason why they struggle. I would not single out dyslexia, as school districts should be responding to any reading issues. All reading issues should be addressed through a multi-tiered system of support that will include everything from first instruction to special education services requiring an individualized education plan. Requiring school systems to report out on student literacy results, in my opinion, is fine. However, when the schools report out, it should be with a growth focus. The idea has to be all around growth. Instead of looking at a certain set standard, we should be looking at what's the amount of growth that students on average are making in that system. In terms of the superintendent's evaluation, you can read my written comments, but I think that's kind of silly. I do not think that should be tied to student literacy outcomes. There's no research that I know of that even supports this straight on for a classroom teacher, much less a superintendent. I do not think any one person should be held accountable for literacy scores. I think it's more about the system. There is a research-based synthesis of education that looks currently at over 1,000 meta-analysis of instructional strategies and practices, has over 55 million students in the studies that are in there. And one of the top-rated effective practices is a concept called collective efficacy. In short, this means that all educators believe they have the collective responsibility to do whatever they need to support all students. And that's where I think we need to go. And I'm hoping that Act 173 and any other legislation we pass will help us in that regard. If I'm great at teaching something in first grade, and we've got 3 first grades in my school, and I'm really strong in one specific area, then let's use my skills to help train the other teachers. Let's use my skills to help teach those kids that are struggling in that area. And with the flexibility that 173 is going to allow us once it's fully implemented, it'll be easier to do that because we won't be worried so much about whether a kid's categorized this way or that way. It'll just be, this is the need they have. Who's the best person to help fill that need? Lastly, maybe most importantly in the long run, in terms of teacher preparation programs, I think having the Agency of Education reviewing these programs, especially with an eye to reading instruction training, is a really good idea. We often hear that our elementary teachers know how to teach reading. I've had that conversation with Vermont NEA many times. It's not true. It's just not true. They don't. Many of them do not know how to teach reading. I don't know how to teach reading. We are weak in phonemic awareness. We are weak in phonics. And I don't see how we can dispute that. And our programs, our preparation programs need to focus on that. We're really good at vocabulary, damn good. And I think we're probably pretty good at reading comprehension. I forget what the fifth thing even is, but phonemic awareness and phonics, that's not how most of our teachers in Vermont were taught to teach reading. And they need to have that skill set, because if they don't, there's always going to be a subset of our students that we're going to miss. So to summarize, or to finish, the better trained our teachers are in providing high quality reading instruction to all students, the better our students are going to be in reading. And what happens now, oftentimes there's such a large number of students that aren't being reached by first instruction that schools are constantly trying to fill that gap. And they're doing so sometimes with people that don't necessarily have the best training. And there's too many students that are in that gap situation. If we could really have 80% of our kids reading effectively just through strong first instruction, then the whole thing becomes so much easier as a system. And with that, I'll take any questions. Sorry, I rambled a little bit there.
Very helpful. Very helpful. More of a comment, but it is similar to what both Libby and Chelsea mentioned. We need to focus on teachers, make sure that they have the tools and resources and time to advance in their profession that means so much to them, and learning how to teach reading, which without a doubt takes training. And the other piece that for committee members that I do want to find out is, again, who in AOE is there as a resource. I mean, when Libby mentioned that it's not her to-go place, the Agency of Education, should we be looking at whether or not it should be the to-go place, or at least one of the places? Can the agency be staffed up so that they can send people out? I was just we were going to, next week, we're spending a couple hours looking at foreign language teaching in this state. And I believe the people that are coming in to talk to us about foreign language are the same people that came in to talk to us about civic education. And that is, I'm afraid that if I asked for the literacy folks to come in, it would be the same folks, and maybe not quite that, but I am worried that we're not giving teachers what they need in the agency. And that's nobody's, and this isn't a blame. These kinds of things happen over a long period of time, and it's, but it's certainly something that I think we need to have our eye on. Senator Hooker.
It just occurs to me, Senator Campion, that we're looking at this, and Jay and all, we're looking at this and realizing that our teachers need training, that our teachers need support, but it goes, I think, even before that, into teacher preparation at the college level. Yeah. I mean, and I have to say, if you live long enough, what goes around comes around. I learned to read with phonics, and that was a long time ago. And there have been many permutations on how to teach reading since I was being taught to read. But, best practices really need to be looked at more carefully.
Yeah. Ms. Bonesteel, I see that you've just popped back in. So wondering if you want to comment.
I was just wanting to comment, thanks.
No, it's a good way of letting us know that something's on your mind.
It's just about the teacher prep pieces, right? And so if a teacher goes from a bachelor's degree in education and straight into their master's degree in education, they have never been in the classroom except as a student teacher. And the place where teachers really become teachers is when they have their own classroom. And so I think that, yes, there is some work to be done in teacher ed in Vermont. For instance, my teacher ed practice in New York, I was solo in a classroom for a full month with no other teacher in there. And in Vermont, it's 1 week. And it's even less than that sometimes. So there is some work to be done in teacher prep. However, it's not a place to put all our eggs. It's not a basket to put all our eggs. That teachers learn on the job, and we need to get better at the job embedded professional development for teachers for things that matter, and very intentional there.
Ms. Bonesteel, when you say, it sounds like in a way you and Senator Hooker are saying really the same thing, because is it not, who's making the decision that teachers are only in the classroom for that 1 week? Is it the standards for which our state, our universities and colleges follow here?
No, that's a really good question. Jay might know actually better than I do, but I'm not positive. All I know is that our student teachers do 1 week of solo teaching in our district. And that is a very different model than what I experienced as a student teacher in New York. So anyway, it's a limited piece. You're just cutting your teeth in your teacher ed program. You're in a teacher ed program because you love kids, right? Yeah. And so when you're really in the thick of it, where you have to have these 20 little ones grow and you're responsible for it, there's a whole lot of learning that happens in that first 5 years of teaching. And I would, if I met the kids in my first year of teaching, my first 2 years of teaching in Louisiana, I would apologize to them because I was not the best teacher for them, but I can tell them that I loved them a lot, right? So you just want to think about where we put our eggs. And yes, there's some looking at our teacher ed preparation programs in Vermont, but I think there's more, we build more capacity by really looking at our teachers who are in the field already.
Yeah, and I see it, like you said, it's not one basket, but it's both. I think Senator Hooker brings up a great point. I mean, what's happening in our teacher education programs? Is it some policy where we're just, for what reason are people just in the classroom for that 1 week? And the more I, read and learn about this, it sounds like, again, that we need to make sure that our teachers are learning the right way in terms of how to teach reading. Mr. Nichols, do you know how, would be the person we would contact to find out why Vermonters, why teacher education candidates are only probably spending possibly a week in a classroom, or just to understand that kind of work?
And I'm referring to their solar week, just
their solar week,
but their solar week.
Right. Probably the best person to talk about that, if I had to guess, would be Jess DeCarlos, because she serves on that ROPA standards board that oversees the colleges, and she's the AOE rep. So
Jess DeCarlos, who we had in for civics, and she's coming in to talk about foreign languages. And thank you.
Which speaks to your point.
Busy lady, yeah.
It speaks to your point. We had she was in a meeting with me today from 10 to 12, so she is.
Yeah.
We had 226 employees in the AOE, a decade and a half ago. Now we have 160.
What was it a decade and a half ago?
226 or something.
Yeah.
Before the recession of 2007, 2008, and we lost a third of our employees at the AOE.
Thank you, Senator Hooker. You had your hand up before I.
I think now student teaching is moved back, whereas it used to be like in your senior year, by the time you've been through, 3 years of college and decided you want to be in education, then they put you finally into a student teaching role. So I certainly agree with Ms. Bonesteel about, the learning is on the job, and you have to continue the supports and the professional development all along. But I did have another question with regard to teacher reading specialists. And, what's the role, what do you see the role of reading specialists as opposed to classroom teachers who are receiving the training that they need to teach reading? So I don't know who.
That to me, Senator, I can certainly.
Either you or Mr. Nick.
So some of the things that I see with a reading specialist, those who have the actual degree and the background and the skill level are few and far between. That's what I would say first. They haven't been budgeted for unless schools have a large amount of Title I dollars, which is federal dollars coming to us. Those positions are, I think Jay might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but they're generally funded through Title I dollars. So for instance, my school, Union Elementary School, has over 400 students in it, and they have one reading interventionist, and he used to be a special educator. He doesn't have that licensure. That's not enough, right, for 400 students. because we don't get a lot of Title I dollars. What I see happening, and Jay, jump in here, because if I'm over assuming, I don't want to do that. What I see happening a lot with the reading interventionist position is generally it's a teacher who has been teaching for a while, wants to get out of the classroom, believes that's an easier job, and principals want them out of the classroom. And so they move them into that role, and they don't have the skill level they need to really attack the universal skills that kids need when they're really tangled in literacy. And they also don't have the skill level of reading a data and saying, this is the profile that this reader has. This is the strategy, the pedagogical strategy I'm going to use for this time frame, and then move, so whether it's an Orton Gillingham because the kid's tangled this way, or whether it's, Rosinski fluency because the kid's tangled this way, or whether it's a Wilson or a LLI program, so they're basically teachers who kind of just use a hodgepodge of, you're going to get 30 minutes 5 times a week, and we're going to see what happens. And it's basically just it's like talking slower talking slower and louder rather than actually making a difference, or whatever that phrase is. That's my assumption of what has happened in Vermont with intervention systems. And I could be totally off. And I know some places have done it really, really well and have really skilled people, but it's fewer and farther between than it's not the general rule. Jay, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, and I would love to be able to correct you and tell you how wrong you are, but unfortunately you're not. What you just described is what happens in most places in Vermont. We have people that are moved into those roles that maybe they were a great teacher at one point, but maybe they're a little bit burnt out now, or maybe they never were a great teacher and the principal thinks, well, I got this person on my payroll. They're not performing poor enough where I'm going to be able to have them leave as a teacher. So I'm going to make them my instructional support person in reading. Happens all the time. And most times they're not qualified to do it.
Senator Lyons.
Well, there's so much here, it's difficult to weigh in, but as I'm listening, it seems to me that the issue of teacher development, for me, it rises to the top in terms of how many teachers do we need to influence? I'm ready to look at some data about the pre-K through 3rd grade teachers who might be most influenced in some faculty development. And then how much would we need during the year? How many hours during the year or the summer or whatever? And then let's decide to put that into a proposal. What we were talking about earlier, of course, was loan repayment or tuition incentives. And I think we have an issue now, and I'm hearing about teachers who are ineffective, being sent out to be trained, probably ineffectively as a result of their ineffectiveness. So how can I'm just trying to figure out, it seems like we're ready to take some steps. You guys all have so much expertise, and why don't we just calculate how much money we need to support X number of teachers over a period of time? I know I sound silly, but I really think that I like to act rather than not. So there you have it. That's my thought, Mr. Chair.
It's a great thought, and I think you're right. I mean, how, in a way, we've been starving folks, and we're starting to, we're seeing the results of that. And I think you're absolutely right. And we are at a moment to make some serious change, and it is going to come down in part to money, to making certain that we get people out there supporting teachers and getting the teachers the support that they need and the education that they need. Anything else from the committee before we take a break and then hear from the Stern Center? Mr. Nichols, Ms. Myers, Ms. Bonesteel, I'm sure you'll be back. We really appreciate this. And we need you all to come back. Oh, and Ms. Siglowski as well. We're gonna get somewhere.